The moment Dr. Brooks looked at me with pity instead of respect, I knew my husband had already won at least in his version of the story. "Denise," he said gently, flipping through a file I had never seen before, "your husband has documented several concerning behaviors." My stomach dropped, because I wasn't unstable, but somehow Richard had convinced everyone that I was. And sitting there in that quiet office, I realized something chilling. My husband hadn't just lied about me. He had built a case. If you've ever felt like someone slowly made you doubt your own mind, I want you to stay with me. Like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there? I read every single one. I used to believe I had a good marriage. Not perfect, no marriages, but steady, predictable, safe. Richard Harper was the kind of man people trusted. He had that calm voice, the one that made you feel like everything was under control. As a psychologist, he spent decades listening to other people's problems, guiding them through grief, anxiety, broken families. In our community in Columbus, Ohio, people didn't just respect him. They relied on him. And for 35 years I did too. "I don't know what I'd do without you," I used to tell him. He would smile soft and reassuring. "That's what I'm here for, Denise." Back then, it sounded like love. Now looking back, it sounds like ownership. It didn't start with anything obvious. There were no shouting matches, no slammed doors, no bruises, nothing you could point to and say, "That's abuse." It started small. Tiny corrections, little adjustments. "Denise, that's not quite how it happened," Richard would say gently at dinner with friends. At first I thought he was just being precise. He liked facts, details, accuracy. That was part of being a doctor, right? Like the time we were at Linda Carter's house. She lives 2 doors down, has for years. We were talking about a vacation we took to Cape Cod. "I remember that little seafood place by the harbor," I said, smiling. "You ordered clam chowder every single day." Richard chuckled, shaking his head. "No, Denise, that was Martha's Vineyard, not Cape Cod." I paused, because I was sure it had been Cape Cod. But everyone laughed lightly, and I felt that small, strange flicker of doubt. "Oh, maybe you're right," I said. Richard gave me that same soft smile. "I usually am." Everyone laughed again. So did I. But something in my chest tightened. Moments like that began to stack up, quietly, almost invisibly. At first it was just details, places, dates, who said what. Richard always corrected me, but never harshly. Always calmly. Always with that same tone, like he was helping me. "Denise, you're mixing things up again. Denise, you're remembering it wrong. Denise, you've always had a tendency to do that." That last one stuck with me. Always I didn't remember always being like that. But he said it so confidently, and he was the professional. So I started second-guessing myself. I began to pause before speaking in conversations. I would mentally rehearse what I was about to say, just to make sure it was right. Sometimes I would even look at Richard first, just to see if he would nod or correct me. That was the part I didn't notice at the time. How I slowly started depending on him to validate my own memories. It didn't happen overnight. It happened so gradually I didn't see it. But other people did, or at least they started noticing something. "Denise, are you okay?" Linda asked me one afternoon while we were watering her plants. I forced a smile. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" She hesitated. "I don't know. It just seems like Richard corrects you a lot lately." I laughed it off. "Oh, that's just him being him. You know how he is." But Linda didn't smile back. "He didn't used to do that. Her words lingered long after I went home. That night, I mentioned it casually. Linda thinks you correct me too much, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Richard looked up from his book, calm as ever. She's not trained to notice cognitive patterns, he said. I blinked. What do you mean? He sighed gently, as if explaining something simple to a child. Denise, I don't correct you to embarrass you. I do it because I care. I've noticed some inconsistencies in your memory over the past few years. My stomach dropped slightly. Inconsistencies? Yes. He closed his book, giving me his full attention. Small things, mostly, but they've become more frequent. I stared at him. I wanted to argue, to say no, that's not true. But suddenly, all those little moments came rushing back. Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, dates, conversations. What if he was right? I didn't realize. I whispered. He reached across the table and took my hand. That's exactly why I'm here, he said softly. To help you notice what you can't see yourself. I felt a strange mix of comfort and fear. Comfort because my husband was taking care of me. Fear because maybe I really couldn't trust my own mind. After that conversation, something shifted inside me. I became quieter, more careful. I started writing things down. Appointments, conversations, little details, just to keep track. But even then, Richard would find ways to explain it away. You're misinterpreting your own notes, he'd say. Or, context matters. Denise, you're missing context. It was exhausting, trying to prove your own reality, trying to hold on to something that kept slipping through your fingers. And the worst part, he never raised his voice, never got angry, never did anything that looked wrong from the outside. To everyone else, he was the patient, caring husband. And I was confused, forgetful, maybe even unstable. That word hadn't been said yet, not out loud, but I could feel it forming, slowly, like a shadow growing behind me. And the scariest part, I was starting to believe it. The first time I truly questioned my own sanity wasn't because of Richard. It was because of everyone else. It happened at Linda's birthday dinner. There were 6 of us around the table, people I had known for years. Women I had laughed with, cried with, raised children alongside. People who used to look at me like I was steady, reliable. That night, they looked at me differently. It started with something small. I brought that lemon cake you love, I said to Linda as I set the box on the counter. She smiled, but there was hesitation in it. Denise, I told you yesterday we were doing chocolate this year. My hand froze. No, you didn't, I said a little too quickly. You said lemon. I remember because you said it reminded you of your mom. Linda glanced at the others, then back at me. I didn't say that, she said gently. My chest tightened. I'm sure you did, I insisted, my voice softer now. Richard stepped in before anyone else could speak. Denise, he said, calmly, placing a hand on my shoulder. We talked about this last night. Remember Linda mentioned chocolate twice. I turned to him. I don't remember that. His expression didn't change. That same composed, patient look. I know, he said, quietly. That's what I'm concerned about. Concerned. Not angry, not annoyed, concerned. And suddenly the room felt smaller. Like the air had shifted. I looked around the table. No one was laughing anymore. No one was correcting him. They were watching me, carefully, like I might break. I think I just mixed it up, I said quickly, forcing a smile. It's been a long week. Linda nodded, relieved. It's okay, Denise. Really. But it didn't feel okay. Not at all. The rest of the night, I barely spoke. Every time I opened my mouth, I felt eyes on me, measuring, judging, waiting for me to get something wrong. And the worst part, I started doing it too, second-guessing every word before it left my lips. By the time we got home, my head was pounding. "I didn't get it wrong," I said the moment the door closed. Richard sighed, setting his keys down. "Denise." "I didn't," I repeated, my voice shaking. "I remember the conversation. She said lemon." He turned to me slowly. "Do you remember what you had for breakfast yesterday?" I blinked. "What? Just answer the question." I had toast and coffee." He tilted his head slightly. "You skipped breakfast yesterday. You told me you weren't hungry." A cold wave washed over me, because I couldn't remember, not clearly. I saw flashes, coffee, maybe toast, but nothing solid. "You see," he said gently, "it's not about being right or wrong. It's about patterns. Patterns. That word again. I hated that word." "I'm not losing my memory," I said, but it came out weaker than I intended. "I didn't say you were losing it," he replied calmly. "I said there are inconsistencies." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And Denise, they're getting more frequent." I stared at him. I wanted to argue, to fight back, but suddenly I wasn't sure I could. Because what if he was right? What if those small moments weren't just accidents? What if they were something bigger? That night I lay awake for hours, going over every conversation, every detail, every time he corrected me, trying to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining things. But the harder I tried, the more everything blurred together. And that terrified me. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my daughter. "Hi, Mom," Emily said, cheerful as always. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, trying to sound normal. We talked for a few minutes, small things, her work, the weather, her kids. Then I asked, "Emily, have you ever noticed me forgetting things?" There was a pause, too long. My heart started to race. "Well, sometimes," she said carefully. "Little things, Mom. Nothing serious." "What kind of things?" "Like repeating stories, or getting dates mixed up." I closed my eyes. "How often?" "Not a lot," she said quickly. "And honestly, Dad mentioned you've been under some stress lately. So Dad mentioned it, I cut in." Another pause. "Yes," she said. "He said he was a little worried. That's all." I felt something shift inside me. Something cold. "So you think I'm what? Losing it?" I asked quietly. "No." "Mom." "That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe you should talk to someone. Just to be sure. Just to be sure." The same phrase Richard used. I hung up shortly after that. Not because I was angry, but because I was scared. Because now, it wasn't just him. It was Emily, Linda, the others at dinner. All of them seeing something I couldn't, or believing something he had told them. That thought crept in slowly, quietly. But once it was there, it wouldn't leave. What exactly had Richard been telling people about me, and how long had he been saying it? That afternoon, I went into his study. I told myself I was just looking for a book. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I was looking for something else. Something I couldn't name yet. Something that might explain why my entire world suddenly felt unreliable. I stood there for a long moment, staring at his desk. Everything was neat, organized, controlled, just like him. Then I noticed it. A black notebook. tucked slightly under a stack of papers. Something about it felt intentional, like it wasn't meant to be seen. My hand hovered over it. For a second, I hesitated, because opening it felt like crossing a line. But then I thought about Linda, about Emily, about the way Dr. Brooks had looked at me. And I opened it. I wish I could say I hesitated longer before reading it. I didn't. The moment I opened that black notebook, I knew whatever was inside it was going to change everything. The first page was dated 3 months ago. Patient D.H. spouse. My fingers tightened around the cover. Spouse. He wasn't just writing notes. He was documenting me. Like a case, like I wasn't his wife but his subject. I flipped to the next page. Observed behavior. Subject displayed confusion regarding recent conversation. Insisted on inaccurate memory despite correction. Mild agitation noted. My heart started pounding. That wasn't what happened. That was the night at Linda's. And that's not how it went. Not even close. I kept reading. Pattern emerging. Increasing resistance when corrected. Possible early signs of cognitive decline or paranoia. Paranoia. The word blurred in front of my eyes. I am not paranoid, I whispered to the empty room. But suddenly, I felt like I had to say it out loud. Like silence meant agreement. I turned the page again. There were dozens of entries, dates, times, observations, all written in the same clinical tone. All about me. And every single one twisted, rewritten, bent just enough to make me sound unstable. Subject accused me of misremembering shared events. Displays defensiveness when confronted with inconsistencies. That wasn't what happened. I wasn't accusing him. I was trying to understand, trying to hold on to what I knew was real. But on these pages, I sounded irrational, unreliable, sick. My stomach twisted as I flipped faster, scanning entries. Subject appears increasingly dependent. Memory lapses more frequent. Emotional volatility observed. Tearful without clear trigger. Recommendation: further evaluation by third-party professional. I froze. Further evaluation. That's what this was leading to. Not just conversations. Not just doubts. A diagnosis. A label. Something official. Something that couldn't be undone. I pressed my hand against my mouth. Because suddenly, everything made sense. Dr. Brooks. The way he looked at me. The way Richard spoke for me. The way people started treating me like I was fragile. This notebook, it wasn't just private notes. It was evidence. Carefully built. Step by step. Page by page. And the most terrifying part? It looked legitimate, professional, convincing. If I didn't know the truth, I might have believed it too. I sank into Richard's chair, my hands shaking. How long, I whispered. How long have you been doing this? The room was silent, but the answer was right there in front of me. Months, maybe longer. I forced myself to keep reading, because I needed to know how deep this went. About halfway through the notebook, something changed. The tone became more deliberate, more strategic. Discussed concerns with daughter E.H. She appears receptive. Will continue to reinforce observations gently. My breath caught. Emily. He had talked to Emily about me, not as a husband, as a professional, framing me as a patient. I flipped another page. Spoke with close friend L.C. Introduced idea of mild cognitive concern. Response supportive, slightly hesitant. Will revisit. Linda. He had planted the idea. Before I ever noticed anything was wrong. before anyone questioned me. He had already started building the narrative, piece by piece, conversation by conversation. "Oh my God," I whispered. This wasn't just manipulation. This was planning, careful, intentional, controlled. Exactly like everything else he did. My chest tightened as I reached the last few pages. The handwriting was more recent, sharper, more decisive. Next step. Encourage formal evaluation. Third-party confirmation will solidify case. Case. He used that word again. Not marriage, not concern. Case. My pulse pounded in my ears, because now I understood something I hadn't before. Richard wasn't just trying to make me doubt myself. He was trying to make everyone else believe I was unstable, and once they believed it, it wouldn't matter what I said, because I would already be labeled, dismissed, explained away. Everything I said would sound like denial, like symptoms, like proof. I closed the notebook slowly. My hands were no longer shaking. They were steady, too steady, because something inside me had shifted. The fear was still there, but underneath it, something else had taken its place. Clarity, cold, sharp clarity. "I'm not losing my mind," I said quietly. For the first time, I believed it. Not because Richard told me, not because anyone confirmed it, but because I had seen the truth with my own eyes. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't memory loss. This was manipulation, and it was deliberate. I stood up slowly, holding the notebook. For a moment, I considered confronting him, throwing it in his face, demanding an explanation. But then I stopped. Because that's exactly what he would expect. And if I did that, he would have an answer ready. A calm explanation. A way to twist it, to make me look emotional, unstable, again. No, that wouldn't work. I needed something else, something stronger, something he couldn't talk his way out of. I walked back to the desk and placed the notebook exactly where I found it. Same angle, same position, like I had never touched it, because from this moment on, I couldn't let him know that I knew. I took a slow breath, then another. "Okay," I whispered to myself. "If you want to build a case..." I paused, a new thought forming, clear, dangerous. So will I. For the first time in months, I didn't feel confused. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel unsure. I felt awake. And Richard had no idea. The next morning, I made coffee like nothing had changed. Same mug, same routine, same quiet kitchen. Richard sat across from me reading the newspaper like he always did. Calm, composed, untouchable. "Morning?" he said without looking up. "Morning," I replied, steady. If he noticed anything different about me, he didn't show it. And that told me everything. He thought he was still in control. Good. Because that was exactly what I needed. I was thinking, he said casually, folding the paper, "we should revisit that evaluation we talked about." I took a slow sip of coffee. "What evaluation?" He studied me for a second, like he was measuring something behind my eyes. "Denise," he said gently. "Dr. Brooks, remember? We discussed this last week." I let a small pause hang in the air. Just enough. "Oh, right," I said, as if recalling it slowly. That. There was a flicker of satisfaction in his expression. Subtle, but I saw it. "You seemed open to it," he continued. I think it would give us clarity. Us. Not me. Us. As if this was a shared problem, as if we were on the same side. I nodded slowly. Okay, just one word, but it changed everything, because I saw it in his eyes. Relief, not concern, not hesitation. Relief, like a door had just opened for him. Good, he said. That's a very reasonable decision. Reasonable. That word again. Everything about him was about appearing reasonable, measured, rational, while quietly pushing me into a position where I looked like the opposite. I can call Alan today, he added. Alan, not Dr. Brooks. Of course, they were colleagues, friends probably, which meant one thing. This wasn't going to be neutral. Sure, I said softly, and just like that, the plan moved forward, his plan, but now mine too. The rest of the day I played my part, carefully, deliberately. I moved a little slower, paused a little longer before answering questions. Let my eyes linger just enough to suggest uncertainty. Not exaggerated, not obvious, just enough. Because I had read his notes. I knew exactly what version of me he was trying to build, and now I was going to give it to him, but on my terms. That afternoon, I found him in his study. Richard, I said quietly from the doorway. He looked up. Yes, I forgot if I took my medication this morning. His eyes sharpened slightly. Which medication? I hesitated. Just for a second. The vitamin D, Richard, I said quietly from the doorway. He looked up. Yes, I forgot if I took my medication this morning. His eyes sharpened slightly. Which medication? I hesitated. Just for a second. The vitamin D. There it was again. That look. Observation. Assessment. Like he was writing another entry in that notebook in his head. You did, he said. I watched you. Oh, I murmured. Right. I stepped back slowly. Thank you. As I walked away, I felt it. The shift. He was watching me more closely now. Not suspicious, interested. Like a scientist observing a subject whose behavior was starting to confirm a hypothesis. Good. Let him watch. That night, I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying every line from that notebook, every word he used. Subject. Observed behavior. Cognitive decline. I whispered it to myself. Not in fear, but in understanding. Because now I knew the rules of the game. And if I was going to survive this, I had to play better than him. The next day, he drove me to the appointment. I thought it might help if I came with you, he said as we got in the car. Of course you did, I thought. Out loud, I smiled faintly. I'd like that. He nodded, satisfied. The drive was quiet. Too quiet. I could feel him glancing at me every few minutes, checking, measuring, waiting for something. So I gave it to him. At a red light, I turned to him. Richard, have we been to this office before? He looked at me carefully. No, Denise. This is your first time. Oh, I said softly. It feels familiar. He didn't respond right away. Then he nodded slowly. That happens sometimes. I turned back to the window, letting the silence stretch. Inside, my heart was racing, because every word I said now mattered, every reaction, every pause. It was all part of the picture he was building, and I was feeding it, but not blindly anymore. When we arrived, the building looked exactly how I expected. Clean, neutral, professional. The kind of place where people trusted what they were told, where records mattered, where words became truth. Richard placed a hand on my back as we walked in. Gentle, guiding, possessive. "I'll be right there with you," he said. I nodded, but inside I thought, not for long. We checked in at the front desk. The receptionist smiled politely. "Denise Harper." I hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, then nodded. "Yes." She typed something into her computer. "Dr. Brooks will see you shortly." I sat down in the waiting area, Richard beside me. Close. Too close. I could feel the weight of everything pressing in. The lies, the notes, the careful manipulation. But underneath it all, there was something stronger now. Focus. Because this wasn't just about proving him wrong anymore. This was about understanding how far he was willing to go. And what exactly he planned to do once I was officially labeled. A few minutes later, the door opened. "Denise," a voice called. I looked up. Dr. Alan Brooks stood there. Same calm expression, same measured tone, the same man who had looked at me with pity. Richard stood first. "I'll come in with her," he said smoothly. Dr. Brooks nodded. Of course. Of course." I stood up slowly, took a breath, and followed them inside. Because now, I was walking straight into the case my husband had built against me. Only this time, I knew it existed. The moment I sat down in Dr. Brooks' office, I understood something clearly. This room was not designed for truth. It was designed for conclusions. "Denise," Dr. Brooks said warmly, folding his hands on the desk. "Thank you for coming in." I nodded, keeping my expression soft. Of course. Richard sat beside me, close enough that I could feel his presence but not touching. Observing. Always observing. Dr. Brooks glanced briefly at a folder on his desk. I didn't need to ask what was inside. I already knew. "So," he continued, "your husband has shared some concerns with me." There it was. Not questions, not curiosity. Concerns. Preformed, prepackaged, delivered. I lowered my eyes slightly as if unsure. "Okay." Dr. Brooks leaned forward just a bit. "Richard mentioned you've been experiencing some memory inconsistencies. Forgetting conversations, mixing up details, things like that." I let a pause linger. Then I nodded slowly. Sometimes I said quietly. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Richard shift. Satisfied. Encouraged. He wanted me to admit it. To validate everything he had written. So I gave him just enough. Not too much. Just enough to make him confident. Dr. Brooks continued. "Have you noticed any changes in your mood? Anxiety, confusion moments where things don't feel clear?" I looked up at him, held his gaze for a second, then let it soften. "Sometimes things feel off," I admitted. Not a lie, just not the truth he thought. "Can you give me an example?" he asked. I hesitated again, carefully, then said, "Sometimes I remember something one way, and Richard remembers it differently." Dr. Brooks nodded immediately. As couples age, that's not uncommon. But frequency matters. Frequency. There it was again. Everything was about patterns, trends, data. Not context, not intention, not truth. I clasped my hands together in my lap. "I just don't know which one of us is right anymore," I said softly. That part was true, just not in the way they thought. Dr. Brooks made a note, actually wrote something down. I watched his pen move. And I realized this was how it started. A sentence, an observation, something written, then repeated, then believed. Richard spoke up for the first time. "It's been getting worse over the past year," he said calmly. "Subtle at first, but more noticeable lately." Dr. Brooks nodded. "And how does that affect daily life?" he asked. Richard answered before I could. "She gets overwhelmed more easily, sometimes forgets plans we've made, and she becomes defensive when I try to clarify things." Defensive. Clarify. His language was perfect, carefully chosen, neutral on the surface, but loaded underneath. "I don't mean to interrupt," I said, gently turning slightly toward Richard. He looked at me, calm, expectant. "But I don't feel overwhelmed," I added. A small contradiction. Just enough. Dr. Brooks looked between us. "Denise, can you tell me how you feel when these situations happen?" I took a breath. This was the moment, the line I had to walk carefully. "I feel confused," I said slowly. "Not about the memory itself, but about why we remember it differently." Dr. Brooks paused. "It differently." Dr. Brooks paused. That wasn't the answer he expected. "I see," he said. "And what do you think causes that?" I shrugged lightly. "I don't know." Another pause. Then I added, "But I've started writing things down to keep track." That wasn't the answer he expected. "I see," he said. "And what do you think causes that?" I shrugged lightly. "I don't know." Another pause. Then I added, "But I've started writing things down to keep track." That made both of them react. Subtle, but I saw it. Richard's jaw tightened just for a second. Dr. Brooks leaned forward. "That's actually a very good strategy," he said. "Yes," I replied. "But sometimes even then, I'm told I misunderstood my own notes." Silence. Not long, but enough. Dr. Brooks glanced at Richard, just briefly, then back at me. "Can you explain that?" he asked. I nodded slowly, like I'll write something down, a conversation. But later Richard says I missed the context, or interpreted it wrong. I kept my tone neutral, not accusing, not emotional, just factual, because facts were harder to dismiss. Richard spoke again, smooth as ever. "Context is important," he said. "Denise tends to focus on specific details without considering the full situation." There it was, his counter, expected, prepared. Dr. Brooks nodded slightly. "That can happen," he said. "Of course it can. Everything can happen. That's what made this so dangerous. Anything could be explained, reframed, redefined." I leaned back slightly. Let the conversation move. Let them build their narrative. Because I wasn't here to stop it. Not yet. The session continued like that for nearly an hour. Questions, answers, notes, observations, Richard speaking just enough, me responding just enough. A careful dance. Until finally Dr. Brooks closed the folder. "I'd like to schedule a more formal cognitive assessment," he said. There it was. Step 2, official, documented, real. I nodded. "Okay." Richard exhaled softly beside me. Relief. Again, Dr. Brooks smiled gently. "This is just to give us clarity. Nothing to worry about." Nothing to worry about. I almost smiled at that. Because everything about this was something to worry about. We stood up to leave. Richard placed his hand lightly on my back again, guiding me out, always guiding. But this time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel unsure. I felt ready, because now I had seen it firsthand. How easily a story could be built, how quickly a person could be turned into a diagnosis, and how quietly the truth could disappear if no one stopped it. As we walked to the car, Richard glanced at me. "You did really well in there," he said. I looked at him, met his eyes. "Did I?" I asked. He smiled. "Yes, you were very honest." Honest. I held that word for a moment, then nodded. "I'm trying to be." We got into the car. He started the engine, and as we drove away, I looked out the window, watching the world pass by, thinking about everything I had just seen, everything I had confirmed. And one thing became crystal clear: if I didn't start gathering proof, watching the world pass by, thinking about everything I had just seen, everything I had confirmed. And one thing became crystal confirmed. And one thing became crystal clear: if I didn't start gathering proof, his version of me would become permanent. And once that happened, there would be no way back. I turned slightly toward him. Richard Clear, if I didn't start gathering proof, his version of me would become permanent. And once that happened, there would be no way back. I turned slightly toward him. "Richard," I said softly. "Yes, do you think I'm getting worse?" He didn't hesitate. "I think we caught it early," he said calmly. "Early, like this was inevitable." Like this was already decided. I nodded slowly, then turned back to the window, because now I knew exactly what I had to do next. That night, I didn't go straight to bed. I waited, listened, counted the seconds between Richard's footsteps upstairs, the soft creak of the bedroom door, the faint hum of the television turning on. Routine. Predictable. That was his greatest strength. And now it was mine too. I gave it 10 minutes before moving. Slowly, quietly, I walked into the living room and picked up my phone. Not to call anyone. Not yet. Instead, I opened the Notes app and I started writing. Not memories, not feelings, facts, time, date, exact words. Everything from the appointment, every sentence Richard had spoken, every response from Dr. Brooks. Because now I understood something critical. If I didn't document my reality, his version would replace it. I wrote until my fingers ached. Then I did something else. Something I had never done before. I turned on the voice recorder and tested it. "Denise Harper," I whispered. June 14th, 9:42 p.m. My voice sounded steady, clear, present, not unstable, not confused. I played it back, just to hear it again, just to remind myself, this is real. I am real. The next morning, I made a decision. If Richard was documenting me, I was going to document him. The opportunity came faster than I expected. He was in the kitchen on the phone, his voice low, professional. I paused just outside the doorway. Then quietly, I pressed record. I understand, Richard was saying. "Yes, we're moving forward with the evaluation." A pause. "Then I've been keeping detailed notes. It's becoming more consistent." My chest tightened. He wasn't just talking to Dr. Brooks. This was someone else. Financial planning is already in place, he continued. We just need confirmation before making any legal adjustments. Legal adjustments. My grip tightened around the phone because suddenly everything became clear. This wasn't just about control. It was about money, power, ownership. If she's deemed incompetent, it simplifies everything, he added. I stopped breathing. Incompetent. He said it so easily, like he was discussing paperwork, not his wife, not the woman he had spent 35 years with. Just a condition to be met, a box to check. I'll keep you updated, he finished, then ended the call. I stepped back silently before he could see me. My heart was racing, but my mind was sharper than it had been in months. Because now I knew this wasn't just suspicion. This was confirmation. Cold, clear, undeniable. I looked down at my phone. The recording was still running. Every word captured. For the first time, I had something real, something he couldn't explain away. That afternoon, I did something even more dangerous. I went back into his study, not to read, to search. This time, I wasn't shaking. I wasn't afraid. I was focused. I opened drawers, checked folders, moved papers just enough to see what was underneath. And then I found it. A thin file tucked behind a stack of documents. Not labeled, not obvious. Hidden, which meant important. I opened it. Inside were copies. Emails. Printed. Organized. Highlighted. My hands moved quickly now, scanning. One email stood out immediately. From Richard Harper to financial advisor Michael Reynolds. Subject: long-term planning options. I read it once. Then again. Slower. More carefully. If Denise's condition progresses as expected, I would like to explore options regarding asset control and medical authority. My vision blurred for a second. Condition progresses. As expected. He wasn't observing. He was predicting, planning, anticipating an outcome he was actively creating, specifically regarding power of attorney and access to joint retirement accounts. There it was. Not just concern, not just worry. Strategy. Legal. Financial. Calculated. I flipped to another page. More emails. More discussions. More steps. Each one building toward the same conclusion. Me being declared unfit. And him taking everything. I pressed my hand against the desk to steady myself. Okay, I whispered. Okay. Because now there was no doubt, no confusion, no second guessing. This was real, and it was happening. I pulled out my phone again, took pictures, every page, every email, every line, carefully, quietly. Then I placed everything back exactly how I found it, just like before, invisible, because I wasn't ready to stop him yet, not until I had enough. That evening, Richard came home with takeout. My favorite, Italian. Thought we could have a nice night, he said, smiling. I smiled back. Sounds good. We sat at the table like we always did. Plates, wine, conversation. Normal. Perfectly normal. Dr. Brooks thinks we're on the right track, Richard said casually. I nodded. That's good. He studied me for a moment. You seem calmer. I feel calmer. I replied, not a lie, just not for the reason he thought. I think this process is helping you, he added. Helping me. I almost laughed. Instead, I took a sip of wine. Maybe it is. He relaxed slightly, leaning back in his chair, confident, certain. Because in his mind, everything was working. Everything was falling into place, exactly as planned. And that's when I realized something important. He wasn't just controlling the narrative. He believed it, completely. That I was weak, that I was confused, that I couldn't fight back. And that belief, that certainty, was going to be his biggest mistake. I set my glass down gently. "Richard," I said. "Yes. What happens if I get worse?" He didn't hesitate. "We'll take care of it," he said calmly. We. Again. Always we. But now I understood what that really meant. Him. In control. Me. Removed. I nodded slowly. Okay. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. You can build your case. You can write your notes. You can convince the world. But when the time comes, I will let them hear your truth. In your own words. 3 days later, Richard told me something that almost made me lose control. "Dr. Brooks wants to meet with both of us again," he said casually over breakfast. "But this time, he'd like to bring in a colleague." I looked up slowly. "A colleague?" He nodded. "A specialist. Just to get a second opinion." Second opinion? It sounded reasonable. It sounded responsible. It sounded dangerous. Because I knew what that meant. More validation. More voices. More professionals confirming the same story. His story. "Okay," I said quietly. And again I saw it. That flicker of satisfaction. He thought the net was tightening. He thought I was walking deeper into it. And he was right. Just not in the way he believed. That afternoon, I made my move. Not against him. Not yet. But around him. I drove to a place I hadn't been in years. A small law office downtown. Nothing flashy. Nothing obvious. Just a simple sign, Harrison and Cole Family Law. I sat in the car for a long moment before going in. Because stepping inside meant one thing: I was no longer just reacting. I was fighting. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked as I entered. I nodded. "I'd like to speak with an attorney. Privately." An hour later, I was sitting across from a woman named Rebecca Cole, mid-50s, sharp eyes, calm presence, the kind of person who didn't miss details. "Tell me what's going on," she said. So I did. Not everything. Not all at once. But enough. The notebook. The recordings. The emails. The evaluation. The word incompetent. She didn't interrupt. Didn't react. Just listened. Carefully. When I finished, she leaned back slightly. "Do you have proof?" she asked. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and handed it to her. She listened to the recording first. Richard's voice filled the room. Clear, cold, controlled. If she's deemed incompetent, it simplifies everything. Rebecca's expression didn't change, but I saw it in her eyes. Recognition. Understanding. Then she looked at the photos of the emails, scrolled slowly, reading every line. When she finished, she placed the phone down. "Denise," she said calmly, "your husband is preparing to legally strip you of decision-making power." I swallowed. "I figured." She nodded. "And if he succeeds, you could lose control of your finances, your medical choices, even your residence." A cold silence settled between us. Because hearing it out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. "So, what do I do?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "You document everything," she said, "and you do not confront him yet." I nodded. I already started. Good, she replied, because right now, he believes he has control. That's your advantage. Advantage. That word felt strange. But right. For now, she continued, you follow through with the evaluation. I blinked. You want me to go along with it? Yes, she said firmly, because if you refuse, it strengthens his narrative. That made sense. Of course it did. Everything had to look consistent, logical, controlled. Just like him? But she added, leaning forward slightly, you also prepare your own counter. I felt something shift inside me. What kind of counter? She held my gaze. One that exposes intent. Intent. Not behavior. Not symptoms. Intent. Because that's what this really was. Not concern. Not care. A plan. How I asked quietly. Rebecca gave a small, knowing look. You already started, she said. Now you just need to make sure the right people hear it. The right people. Not just anyone. Not just friends. Professionals. Authority. People who couldn't be manipulated as easily. Or at least people who would have to listen. Can you help me? I asked. She nodded. Yes. Just one word. But it felt like oxygen. Like I wasn't alone anymore. Before I left, she said something that stayed with me. Denise, can you help me? I asked. She nodded. Yes, just one word. But it felt like oxygen. Like I wasn't alone anymore. Before I left, she said something that stayed with me. Denise, men like your husband don't expect resistance, especially not from someone they've already defined as weak. I held her gaze. I'm not weak. She gave a slight smile. I know. He doesn't. That night I returned home like nothing had happened. Same routine, same quiet, same careful balance. Richard was in the living room. Reading. Always reading. How was your day? He asked without looking up. Quiet, I replied. He nodded, satisfied. Because quiet meant compliant. Quiet meant predictable. Quiet meant safe. But inside me, nothing was quiet anymore. Everything was moving, pieces aligning, a plan forming, slowly, carefully, just like his. Later that evening, he brought up the appointment again. Tomorrow, he said, Dr. Brooks wants to do a more structured evaluation. I nodded. Okay. He studied me for a moment. You seem accepting. I met his eyes. I trust you, I said softly. The words tasted bitter, but necessary. Because trust was the illusion he needed. He smiled, relaxed, completely. And that was the moment I knew. He had no idea. No idea what I had seen, what I had heard, what I had already set in motion. And that was exactly how it needed to stay. I went to bed that night, and for the first time in weeks, I slept. Not because I felt safe, but because I had direction, clarity, purpose. Because tomorrow, I wouldn't just be a subject in his case. I would be something else entirely. Something he hadn't planned for. Something he couldn't control. And when the time came, I wouldn't argue with him. I wouldn't fight him. I would let the truth speak, in his own voice. The morning of the formal evaluation, I woke up before Richard. Not because I was nervous, because I was ready. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. Not to fix my hair, not to adjust my clothes, but to study my own face. My eyes were clear, focused, aware, not confused, not unstable. Remember this, I whispered to my reflection. This is who you are. Because today, they were going to try to redefine me. Again. Richard drove like always. Quiet. Controlled. "You don't have to be nervous," he said as we pulled into the parking lot. I nodded softly. "I'm not." That wasn't entirely true. But it also wasn't fear. It was anticipation. Because today wasn't just about answering questions. It was about listening, observing, catching something they didn't expect me to catch. Inside the office felt colder than before, more clinical, less welcoming, as if the warmth from the first visit had been replaced with something more official, more serious, more final. Dr. Brooks greeted us, but this time he wasn't alone. "This is Dr. Karen Mitchell," he said, gesturing toward a woman seated beside him. She stood, extending her hand. "Nice to meet you, Denise." Her grip was firm, her eyes sharper than his. She wasn't just observing, she was evaluating, constantly. "Nice to meet you," I replied. We all sat, and just like that, it began. Dr. Mitchell took the lead. "Denise, today we're going to go through a series of cognitive and behavioral assessments," she explained. "Nothing to worry about. Just routine." "Routine?" I nodded. "Okay." She started with simple questions. "Orientation. Can you tell me today's date, June 17th? Location, Columbus, Ohio. Do you know why you're here?" I paused. "Not too long. Just enough." "For evaluation," I said. She nodded, writing something down. Of course she did. Everything was being recorded. Everything mattered. Then came memory tests. Words repeated, numbers recalled. Sequences followed. I answered clearly, accurately, without hesitation. And I could feel it. A subtle shift in the room. Not dramatic, but noticeable. Because I wasn't performing the way Richard's notes suggested I would. Dr. Mitchell leaned back slightly, observing, adjusting, reassessing. Good. Let her. Then came the harder part. Behavioral questions. "Denise, how would you describe your relationship with your husband?" I turned slightly toward Richard, then back to her. "Stable," I said. A neutral answer. "Safe. And do you feel supported?" I held her gaze. "Yes." Another safe answer. Richard relaxed slightly beside me, but Dr. Mitchell didn't. She watched me, carefully. "Have you ever felt that your husband misrepresents situations or conversations?" she asked. There it was. The first real question. The first crack in the surface. I paused, longer this time. Let the weight of it settle. "Then I don't know," I said softly. "Honest, but incomplete." "Can you explain that?" she pressed. I nodded slowly. "Sometimes we remember things differently," I said. "And I'm told my version isn't accurate." "And how does that make you feel?" I took a breath. Uncertain. That word landed. I saw it, in both of their reactions, because uncertainty fit their narrative. But it wasn't the whole truth, not even close. Dr. Mitchell wrote something down, then looked at Richard. "In your perspective," he didn't hesitate. "Denise has always been detail-oriented," he said. "But recently, those details have become less reliable. Less reliable. Clean. Polished. Carefully phrased." I watched him as he spoke, studied him the way he had studied me for months, and for the first time I saw it clearly. Not concern, not worry, control. Every word he chose, every pause, every tone. It was all intentional, crafted, designed to guide them to a conclusion. A conclusion he had already decided. Dr. Mitchell nodded slowly. "Have there been any incidents where Denise's behavior caused concern beyond memory issues?" Richard leaned forward slightly. Yes, he said. She's become more defensive, sometimes emotional without clear reason. I almost smiled, because I recognized the line, word for word, from the notebook, from the case. It was all rehearsed, documented, repeated, and now presented. I shifted slightly in my seat, let my expression soften, not defensive, not emotional, controlled. Can I say something? I asked quietly. Dr. Mitchell nodded. Of course. I looked at her directly. Not Richard. Is it possible? I said slowly that two people can remember the same thing differently without one of them being wrong. Silence. Not long, but enough. Because it wasn't a symptom. It was a question. A real one. Dr. Mitchell tilted her head slightly. It is possible, she said carefully, but patterns matter. Patterns. Always patterns? I nodded. I understand. And then I stopped, because I didn't need to push. Not yet. The session continued for another hour. More tests, more questions, more observations. And with every minute that passed, I felt it. The shift. Subtle, but undeniable. Dr. Mitchell wasn't fully convinced. Not yet. Not of me, but not of him either. When it was over, she closed her folder. Thank you, Denise, she said. You did very well. Very well. That wasn't the outcome Richard expected. I stood up slowly. Thank you. As we walked out, I could feel it. The tension, the uncertainty, the cracks forming. Richard was quieter this time, less confident, less certain, and that told me something important. For the first time, his version of me didn't fully hold, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Because doubt alone wouldn't save me. I needed something stronger, something undeniable, something that didn't rely on interpretation, or perspective, or memory. I needed truth. Clear, unfiltered, in his own voice. As we got into the car, Richard finally spoke. That went better than expected, he said. I turned to him. Did it? He hesitated. Just for a second. Yes, but it didn't sound convincing, not even to him. I nodded slowly, then looked out the window. Because now the next step was clear, and it was going to change everything. I didn't confront Richard that night. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse, because Rebecca's voice echoed in my mind. Do not confront him yet. So instead, I did something far more dangerous. I waited. And I prepared. 2 days later, Richard came home earlier than usual. There was something different about him, a tension, not obvious, but there. We need to talk, he said, setting his keys down. I looked up from the couch. Okay. He didn't sit immediately. He stood there for a moment, studying me. Then finally, he took a seat across from me. Dr. Mitchell shared some preliminary impressions. He began. My heart slowed. Not raced, slowed. Because this was it. The moment where his narrative either solidified or started to crack. And I asked softly. He leaned forward slightly. They're seeing inconsistencies, he said. Not severe, but enough to justify further evaluation. Further evaluation. Another step, another layer, another attempt to make it official. I nodded. Okay. He blinked, just once, because that wasn't the reaction he expected. You're okay with that? He asked. I met his eyes. I told you I trust you. There it was again. That word, trust. The one thing he believed he had. and the one thing I was quietly weaponizing. He relaxed slightly. Not completely, but enough. I just want what's best for you, he said. I almost smiled. Instead, I nodded. I know. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't empty. It was building, because I could feel it. He was moving toward something bigger. Denise, he said after a moment, have you ever thought about simplifying things? I tilted my head slightly. What do you mean? He hesitated, carefully choosing his words. Just making sure everything is in order. Legally, financially, in case anything changes. There it was. Not hidden anymore. Not subtle. Clear. Direct. He was moving forward. I let a small pause stretch, then asked, what kind of changes? He held my gaze. If your condition progresses. Condition. Always condition. Always assumed. Never questioned. I nodded slowly. And what would that look like? He exhaled softly. As your husband, I could step in, help manage things, take some pressure off you, take control. That's what he meant. Not help. Control. And how would you do that? I asked. He hesitated again. Just for a second, then said, power of attorney. Temporary at first. Temporary. I almost admired how carefully he built it. Step by step. Piece by piece. Making it sound reasonable. Safe. Necessary. I looked down at my hands. Let them rest there for a moment. Then whispered, do you really think I need that? He leaned closer. Yes. No hesitation. No doubt. Just certainty. Because in his mind, this was already decided. I looked back up at him. Let my eyes soften. Not defensive. Not suspicious. Just vulnerable. Okay, I said quietly. That one word changed everything. I saw it. The relief. The victory. The confirmation that his plan was working. That's a very mature decision, he said. Mature. Rational. Reasonable. Everything he needed me to be so he could justify what he was about to do. When would we start? I asked. He blinked again. Processing, adjusting. Soon, he said, I'll contact the attorney. I nodded. All right. And just like that, he crossed the line, not privately, not in secret, but out loud. To me. He had just admitted his next move, and I had it, not in memory, not in interpretation, but recorded. Because my phone sat quietly beside me on the couch. Screen dark, recording everything, every word, every pause, every intention, for the first time. He had spoken the plan clearly, and he didn't even realize it. Later that night, I sat alone in the bedroom, listening to the recording again. Power of attorney, temporary at first. His voice was calm, confident, certain, like it was already his. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I felt something unexpected. Grief. Not for what he was doing, but for who he used to be. Or maybe who I thought he was. 35 years. And this is how it ends. Not with a fight, not with a mistake, but with a plan. A quiet, calculated plan to erase me. I opened my eyes. The grief didn't disappear, but it changed, hardened, focused. Because this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about exposure, about truth, about making sure that when this came to light, no one would question what he had done. The next morning, I called Rebecca. "I have more," I said simply. "Good," she replied. "Keep going." There was no hesitation in her voice. "No doubt. Just direction. He's moving forward with power of attorney," I added. There was a brief pause. Then we're right on time. Right on time. I exhaled slowly. "What's next?" Her answer came immediately. "We let him proceed." I closed my eyes. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Because the more he commits, the harder it will be for him to deny intent." Intent. Again. That word. Everything came back to that. Not what I did, not how I acted, what he planned, what he executed, what he said. "Denise," she added, "you're not just defending yourself anymore." I listened, carefully. "You're building a case against him." A case. The word echoed in my mind, because that's exactly what he thought he was doing. But now, the roles were shifting, and he didn't even see it. "I understand," I said, and for the first time, I truly did. The following week, everything moved faster. Too fast. Richard scheduled the meeting with the attorney without hesitation. Thursday afternoon, he told me over dinner. "It's just a preliminary consultation." Just that word again. Nothing was ever just anything with him. Everything had layers, intent, timing. I nodded, keeping my tone calm. "Okay." Inside, I could feel it, the pressure building, because this wasn't theory anymore. This was action, legal action, and once it started, it would be harder to stop. That night, I called Rebecca again. He scheduled the meeting. I said, I expected that she replied calmly. "Should I go?" "Yes," she said immediately. "And you record everything." I closed my eyes briefly. "I've been doing that." "Good," she said. "Now we make sure he commits clearly in front of a third party." Replied calmly. "Should I go?" "Yes," she said immediately. "And you record everything." I closed my eyes briefly. "I've been doing that." "Good," she said. "Now we make sure he commits clearly in front of a third party." Commits. That word mattered, because intent wasn't enough. We needed proof of execution. "What if the attorney sides with him?" I asked. There was a small pause. "Then that becomes part of the evidence," she said. I exhaled slowly, because this wasn't just about Richard anymore. It was about anyone who might enable him, anyone who believed him, anyone who saw me the way he described me. "Denise," she added, "you're still ahead. He doesn't know you're building a case." I nodded. I understand. And I did, because that was the only reason this was still working. Thursday came quickly. Too quickly. Richard drove again. "Of course he did. I think this will bring us some peace of mind," he said as we pulled into the parking lot. Peace of mind. I looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time, I didn't recognize him. Not the man I married, not the man I trusted. Just someone calculating. "I hope so," I said softly. We walked into the office together. Professional, neutral, quiet. The receptionist greeted Richard by name. That told me everything. This wasn't new. This wasn't sudden. He had already been here, already started this process, without me. "Mr. Harper, Ms. Harper," she said politely. "Mr. Daniel Reeves will see you now." Daniel Reeves, the attorney. I followed Richard down the hallway, each step heavier than the last, but not because I was afraid. because I knew exactly what this moment meant. We stepped into the office. Daniel Reeves stood up to greet us. Mid-40s, sharp suit, even sharper eyes. "Please have a seat," he said. We sat, Richard slightly closer to him than I was. Aligned, positioned, of course. So Daniel began folding his hands. "Richard mentioned you're exploring some options regarding long-term planning." I stayed quiet. Let Richard speak. This was his moment, his move. "Yes," Richard said smoothly. "We've recently become aware of some cognitive concerns with Denise." There it was. Not hesitation, not uncertainty. A statement. Clear. Direct. Daniel nodded slowly. "And you're looking to establish power of attorney?" "Yes," Richard replied. No pause, no doubt, just confirmation. I felt something inside me go still. Because this was the moment, the line, the point where everything became undeniable. Daniel turned to me. "Denise, do you understand what that means?" I looked at him, held his gaze, then nodded slowly. "It means he would make decisions for me." "Correct," Daniel said. "Financial, medical, legal, depending on how it's structured." I glanced at Richard. He was watching me closely, measuring, waiting, expecting hesitation, fear, confusion. So I gave him something else. "I see," I said calmly. Daniel studied me for a moment. "And how do you feel about that?" I paused, just long enough, then answered, "If it's necessary, I'm open to it." Richard exhaled softly. Relief. Again. Always relief when I agreed. Because agreement meant progress. It meant he was winning. Daniel nodded. "All right. We can start with a limited power of attorney with specific conditions." Conditions, limitations, safeguards. On paper, it sounded balanced. Reasonable, safe. But I knew better. Because once it existed, it could be expanded, adjusted, used. Richard Daniel continued, "We'll need documentation supporting the cognitive concerns." Of course. Proof, evidence. That's what this was all about. "I have detailed records," Richard said. I almost smiled, because I knew exactly what he meant. The notebook, the fabricated observations, the carefully constructed narrative. "I can provide them," he added. Daniel nodded. "That would be helpful." Helpful. That word again. Everything helpful to his case. Daniel turned back to me. "And Denise, I recommend you also undergo a formal cognitive evaluation. It strengthens the process." Strengthens. Of course it does. Everything pointed toward one outcome. One conclusion, one result. I nodded slowly. "I understand." The meeting continued. Technical details, legal terms, processes, steps. But none of it mattered as much as what had already been said. Because Richard had done exactly what we needed him to do. He had declared it, out loud, in front of a legal professional. Clear, direct, intentional, and it was all recorded. When the meeting ended, we stood up, shook hands, smiled politely, like everything was normal. Like this was just another step in a healthy, reasonable process. As we walked out, Richard placed his hand on my back again. Guiding, controlling, confident. "You handled that very well," he said quietly. I looked at him. "Did I?" He nodded. "Yes, you're making this easier." Easier. For him. I smiled faintly. "I'm glad." We got into the car. Silence filled the space. But this time, it felt different because something had shifted, something irreversible. He had crossed a line, not just privately, not just in his thoughts, but legally, formally, documented, and now there was no going back. I turned slightly toward him. "Richard," I said softly. "Yes. When will everything be finalized?" He smiled. "Soon. Very soon." 2 days after the meeting with Daniel Reeves, my phone rang. I already knew who it was before I picked up. "Denise, this is Dr. Brooks' office," the receptionist said. "We'd like to schedule a follow-up session. Both Dr. Brooks and Dr. Mitchell will be present." Of course they would. This wasn't just a check-in anymore. This was escalation. "Tomorrow afternoon works," I said calmly. I hung up and immediately called Rebecca. They scheduled the follow-up, I told her. "Good," she said without hesitation. "This is where it turns." I leaned against the kitchen counter. Her voice dropped slightly. "This is where you stop playing defense." My grip tightened around the phone and start exposing him. The word landed hard, heavy, final. "Are you ready for that?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was, I didn't know if anyone is ever ready for something like that. Destroying a man you once loved, exposing the truth in front of strangers, risking everything. But then I thought about the recordings, the emails, the notebook, the word incompetent, and the way he said it so easily. "Yes," I said quietly. "I'm ready." That night, I prepared, not emotionally, practically. I organized everything: audio files labeled by date, photos of emails backed up twice, notes written clearly chronologically, not a single detail left to memory, because memory was the one thing they were trying to take from me. So I turned everything into evidence, solid, untouchable. The next day, Richard drove me again. But something felt different. He wasn't as relaxed, not as confident. Maybe he sensed something shifting. Or maybe he just knew we were getting close to the end. "You've been very cooperative," he said during the drive. I looked out the window. "I trust the process." That answer satisfied him. It always did, because he believed the process belonged to him. He had no idea I had already taken it back. When we arrived, both Dr. Brooks and Dr. Mitchell were waiting, seated, prepared, focused. This wasn't a routine session. I could feel it the moment I walked in. Denise, Dr. Mitchell said, gesturing to the chair. "Thank you for coming back." I sat down, Richard beside me. Same position, same setup. But this time, everything was different. Dr. Brooks opened a folder. "We've reviewed your initial assessment," he said. "There are some inconsistencies we'd like to explore further." Of course there were. There always would be. Because inconsistency was the narrative. "Okay," I said. Calm, controlled. Dr. Mitchell leaned forward. "Denise would like to revisit some of your previous answers." I nodded. "All right." She flipped through her notes. "In your last session, you mentioned uncertainty about shared memories with your husband." "Yes." "Do you still feel that way?" I paused. This was it, the turning point Rebecca talked about. I could feel Richard watching me, waiting, expecting the same answer, the same hesitation, the same uncertainty. But this time, I didn't give it to him. "I feel something different now," I said. That caught their attention, both of them. Dr. Mitchell tilted her head. Different how I looked directly at her. Not at Richard, not at the floor, at her. "I feel like my memories haven't changed," I said slowly, "but the way they're being described has." Silence, real silence, not polite, not passing, Heavy. Dr. Brooks glanced at Richard, then back at me. Can you explain that? He asked carefully. I nodded. Yes. I reached into my bag, and for the first time I didn't hide it. I took out my phone, placed it on the table, screen facing up. Richard shifted beside me, just slightly, but I felt it. Before I answer, I said, I think it's important that you hear something. Dr. Mitchell's eyes narrowed slightly. In what context? In the context of intent, I said. That word again, intent. It changed everything. Richard spoke quickly. Denise, I don't think this is necessary. I turned to him. Calm, steady. Yes, I said. It is. He stopped. Because for the first time, I wasn't following his lead. I was setting the direction. I pressed play. His voice filled the room, clear, sharp, undeniable. If she's deemed incompetent, it simplifies everything. No one moved. No one spoke. I let it continue. Financial planning is already in place. We just need confirmation before making any legal adjustments. I watched their faces, carefully. Dr. Brooks stiffened. Dr. Mitchell's expression changed completely. No more neutrality. No more passive observation. Now she was listening. Really listening. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was louder than anything I had heard in weeks. What is this? Dr. Brooks asked. His voice was no longer calm. It was uncertain. I met his eyes. This is my husband, I said. Richard finally spoke. That recording is taken out of context. Is it? I asked quietly. I didn't raise my voice, didn't argue, didn't react emotionally, because I didn't need to. The truth was already in the room. I picked up my phone again. There's more. I opened the photo folder, turned the screen toward them. Emails, highlighted, organized, documented. Dr. Mitchell leaned forward, reading quickly, carefully, her eyes moving faster with each line. Richard, she said slowly, what exactly is this? He straightened in his chair, composed again, trying to regain control. These are professional concerns, he said, taken out of her eyes moving faster with each line. Richard, she said slowly, what exactly is this? He straightened in his chair, composed again, trying to regain control. These are professional concerns, he said. Taken out of... Stop, she said sharply. One word. But it cut through everything. He went silent, because now the control had shifted, completely. Dr. Brooks looked between us, then back at the documents, then at Richard. This changes things, he said. No clinical tone, no neutrality, just reality. I sat back in my chair. For the first time since this started, I wasn't being evaluated. I wasn't being observed. I wasn't being questioned. I was being heard. And Richard, no neutrality, just reality. I sat back in my chair. For the first time since this started, I wasn't being evaluated. I wasn't being observed. I wasn't being questioned. I was being heard. And Richard was no longer the authority in the room. He was the subject. And this time, he had no notes to hide behind. For a moment, no one spoke. Not Dr. Brooks, not Dr. Mitchell, not even Richard. And that silence, that heavy, suffocating silence, was the loudest thing I had heard in months. Because for the first time, there was nothing left to reinterpret, nothing left to twist, no room for context, just his words, clear, cold, intentional. Dr. Mitchell was the first to move. She picked up my phone, replayed the recording. Again, slower this time, carefully, as if she were dissecting every word. Richard shifted beside me. I could feel it. The tension, the discomfort, the realization. He was losing control. "That recording is incomplete," he said finally. His voice was still calm, but not steady, not like before. "There's context you're not hearing." Dr. Mitchell didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the phone. "Then explain it," she said. "Simple, direct, unavoidable." Richard straightened. "I was speaking hypothetically," he replied. "As a professional, exploring possible outcomes. Hypothetical, of course, always a clean explanation, always a way out." Dr. Brooks looked at him. "But you said financial planning is already in place," he pointed out. Richard hesitated. "Just for a second. It's standard preparation," he said, "for any situation involving cognitive decline." I almost smiled, because I had heard that tone before. Confident, structured, convincing. The same tone that had made everyone believe him. The same tone that had almost made me believe him. But now I could hear the cracks. Dr. Mitchell finally looked up. Her expression had changed completely. No softness, no neutrality, just focus, and the emails she asked. I slid the phone closer to her. "They're all there," I said quietly. She opened them again, scrolled, read. Her eyes moved faster now, more sharply. "If Denise's condition progresses as expected," she read aloud. She stopped, looked directly at Richard. "What exactly did you mean by as expected?" That question hung in the air. Sharp, precise, dangerous. Richard leaned forward slightly. "I meant based on observed patterns," he said. "Clinical observation. Clinical." He was still trying to stand behind that word, still trying to turn this into something professional, controlled, respectable. But Dr. Mitchell didn't accept it. "Clinical observation requires objectivity," she said, "and documentation that can be verified independently." Her tone was calm, but firm. "Your documentation," she continued, "appears to rely solely on your interpretation." Richard's jaw tightened. "I've been practicing for over 30 years, he said. "And that does not exempt you from bias," she replied. That landed hard. Because this wasn't about me anymore. Not really. This was about him, his methods, his intentions, his credibility. Dr. Brooks leaned back in his chair. "Processing, reevaluating. This raises serious concerns," he said slowly. Serious concerns. The same phrase they had used about me, now turned around. Richard turned to him. "Alan, you know me," he said. "You know my work." Dr. Brooks didn't answer immediately. That hesitation, that pause was everything. Because before there would have been no hesitation, just agreement, trust, confidence. Now there was doubt, and doubt changes everything. "I know your work," Dr. Brooks said finally, then added, "but I don't know your intent here." Silence again. But this time, it felt different. Not heavy, not suffocating, clear, like the air had shifted. Richard exhaled slowly. "I'm trying to help my wife," he said. The words sounded right. They always did. But now they didn't feel right. Not to anyone in that room. Dr. Mitchell closed the folder in front of her. "Then why," she asked calmly, "are there documented discussions about financial control tied directly to a presumed diagnosis that has not been established. No response, because there wasn't one. Not a clean one, not a convincing one. Richard looked at me, for the first time since this started, really looked at me, not as a subject, not as a case, but as opposition. "You recorded me," he said quietly. I met his gaze. Yes, no hesitation, no apology. Why, he asked. That question mattered, not for him, for them. Because this was the moment where my credibility could rise or fall. Because I started to doubt my own reality, I said. My voice was steady, clear, honest, and I needed proof that I wasn't imagining things. Dr. Mitchell watched me closely. Not judging, assessing. Everything I brought here is documented, recorded, verified, not interpreted. I let that sink in, because that was the difference. His version was interpretation. Mine was evidence. Dr. Brooks nodded slowly. "I see that," he said. Richard shook his head slightly. "This is being misrepresented," he insisted. "Denise is—" "Careful," Dr. Mitchell interrupted. One word. But it stopped him completely. Because now, he didn't control the narrative, he didn't control the room, and he definitely didn't control me. "This is no longer an evaluation of Denise," she said. Her voice was calm, final. "This is a review of your conduct." That was it. The shift. Complete. Irreversible. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't bracing myself. I wasn't defending. I wasn't doubting. I was watching. Watching the man who had tried to erase me struggle to explain himself. Without notes. Without control. Without power. Dr. Brooks stood up slowly. "I think we need to pause here," he said. Pause, not continue, not proceed. Pause, because everything had changed. Richard didn't argue, didn't push, didn't correct, because for the first time, he didn't have the upper hand, and he knew it. As we stood to leave, he didn't touch my back, didn't guide me, didn't lead. He walked beside me, equal, silent, and that silence was the loudest confirmation of all. The drive home felt longer than usual, not because of traffic, because of silence. Richard didn't speak, not once. And that silence, it wasn't controlled anymore. It wasn't strategic. It was fractured. I sat beside him looking out the window, but every part of me was aware of him. The way his hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The way his jaw stayed locked. The way he kept glancing at me, quickly, carefully, as if he were trying to understand something he no longer recognized. Finally, halfway home, he spoke. "You shouldn't have done that." His voice was low. Not angry. Worse. Contained. I turned my head slightly. "Done what?" He exhaled sharply. "You know exactly what he said. Recording me. Bringing it into a professional setting. That was inappropriate. Inappropriate." I almost laughed, but I didn't, because this moment mattered. "How was it inappropriate?" I asked calmly. He glanced at me, then back at the road. "It violated trust," he said. Trust. That word again. The same word he had been using to control me, to guide me, to silence me. I nodded slowly. "And what were you doing?" I asked. He didn't answer. Not immediately, which told me everything. "You were documenting me," I continued, "without telling me." "That's different," he said quickly. Oh, his grip tightened on the wheel. Because I was trying to help you. There it was, the justification, the shield, the thing he had been hiding behind this entire time. I turned fully toward him now, and I was trying to protect myself. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was confrontation, real, direct, unavoidable. You've made a serious mistake, Denise, he said finally. His voice had changed, not calm anymore, not controlled. There was something else now. Pressure, threat. I held his gaze. No, I said quietly. I finally stopped making them. That hit him. I saw it, a flicker of something. Not anger, not frustration, something deeper, loss. Because for the first time, he wasn't ahead of me. He wasn't guiding the narrative. He wasn't controlling the outcome. He was reacting, and he hated it. When we got home, he went straight to his study, closed the door, locked it. That had never happened before. Not once. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening, not to sounds, to absence, because something had shifted completely. The house didn't feel tense anymore. It felt divided. Two sides, two truths, and only one of them was going to survive. That night, I didn't wait for him. I didn't check on him. I didn't ask questions, because I already knew he was planning, adjusting, trying to recover control. But this time, he didn't have the advantage. I called Rebecca. It's done, I said. There was a pause. Then, tell me everything. So I did. The recordings, the confrontation, Dr. Mitchell's response, Dr. Brooks' reaction, the shift, the silence, everything. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. That's exactly what we needed, she said. I closed my eyes briefly. It didn't feel like a victory. It's not supposed to, she replied. It's a turning point. Turning point. Yes. That was the right word. Because nothing was Rizzo, the right word. Because nothing was Rizzo-loved yet. But everything had changed. What happens now? I asked. Her answer came calmly. Now he reacts. I leaned back against the wall. And we watch, no she said. Now we prepare for consequences. Elved yet. But everything had changed. What happens now? I asked. Her answer came calmly. Now he reacts. I leaned back against the wall. And we watch. No, she said. Now we prepare for consequences. Consequences. That word sat heavy in my chest. Legal? I asked. Yes, she said, and possibly professional. Professional, of course, because this wasn't just about a marriage anymore. This was about ethics, authority, abuse of power. He's going to try to discredit you? She added. I nodded. I know, because this wasn't just about a marriage anymore. This was about ethics, authority, abuse of power. He's going to try to discredit you, she added. I nodded. I know. And he may escalate, she continued. Emotionally, legally, strategically. I opened my eyes. I'm not afraid of that anymore. And I meant it. Because fear only exists when you don't understand what's happening. Now I understood everything. He's losing control, Rebecca said. Yes, and men like that don't handle it quietly. I let that sink in, because I knew she was right. The next move wouldn't be subtle. It wouldn't be careful. It would be reaction, impulse, desperation, and that's where mistakes happen. "I'll be ready," I said. That night, Richard didn't come to bed. I woke up at 2:13 a.m. and noticed the empty space beside me, cold, untouched. I got up quietly, walked down the hallway. The light in his study was still on, the door still closed. But this time, it wasn't locked. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly pushed it open. He was sitting at his desk, laptop open, papers spread out. But he wasn't working. He was staring at the screen, frozen, for the first time since I had known him. He looked uncertain, vulnerable, human. He looked up when he heard the door. Our eyes met. No words, just recognition of what had happened, of what was coming, of what could never go back to the way it was. "I didn't expect this from you," he said quietly. I stepped into the room. "Neither did I," I replied. And that was the truth, because the man I thought I married would never have done what he did, and the woman I used to be would never have fought back like this. But here we were, two strangers, standing in the middle of something neither of us could undo. "I was trying to protect us," he said. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "You were trying to control me." Silence again. But this time, there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to defend. Just truth. Clear, unavoidable, and finally, undeniable. The next morning, everything felt quiet. Not peaceful, not calm, just still, like the moment before something breaks. Richard wasn't in bed when I woke up. Again. But this time, I didn't go looking for him. I didn't need to, because I already knew. Whatever came next wouldn't be subtle. At 9:17 a.m., my phone rang. "Rebecca." I answered immediately. "Denise," she said, her voice sharper than usual. "We need to move now." My chest tightened. "What happened?" He filed. 2 words. But they changed everything. Filed what I asked, even though part of me already knew. "A petition," she said, "for emergency temporary guardianship." The room spun slightly. Emergency, temporary, guardianship. He had escalated, exactly like she said he would. "His claiming your condition has worsened rapidly," she continued, "and that immediate intervention is necessary." Of course he was, because now he was desperate. I sat down slowly. "When he's claiming your condition has worsened rapidly," she continued, "and that immediate intervention is necessary." Of course he was, because now he was desperate. I sat down slowly. "When this morning," she said, "we've already responded. Already." Of course she had. "What do we do?" I asked. Her answer came fast. "We meet him in court. Court. Not a doctor's office. Not a private discussion. A courtroom. Public. Official. Final." Today I asked. Yes, I closed my eyes for a moment. This was it. The end of the line. "Okay," I said. "I'll be there." The courtroom felt colder than any office I had been in, not physically, emotionally, because everything here was stripped down. No personal history, no emotional context, just facts, evidence, arguments. Richard stood across the room. Suit perfect, posture controlled, expression unreadable. He looked like himself again. Composed, professional, dangerous. But something was different. Something small, almost invisible. He didn't look at me, not once. Rebecca stood beside me, calm, focused. ready. "This is where we finish it," she said quietly. "Finish." I nodded. "I'm ready." The hearing began quickly. No delay, no buildup, just action. The judge, a woman in her 60s, reviewed the file. Expression neutral, eyes sharp. "Mr. Harper, she said you are requesting emergency guardianship over your wife. On what grounds?" Richard stepped forward, confident, controlled. "Your Honor, my wife has shown rapid cognitive decline," he said. "Her ability to make sound decisions is compromised." Richard stepped forward, confident, controlled. "Your Honor, my wife has shown rapid cognitive decline," he said. "Her ability to make sound decisions is compromised." The same script, the same tone, the same carefully constructed story. But this time, it wasn't uncontested. "Do you have supporting evidence?" the judge asked. "Yes," he said, handing over documents. "The notebook, the notes, the narrative." I felt my stomach tighten slightly, because for a moment it looked convincing, clean, organized, professional. But then Rebecca stood. "Your Honor, we would like to submit counter-evidence." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Rebecca placed the phone on the table, along with printed transcripts, emails, dates, times, everything. "Denise Harper has been systematically documented and misrepresented by her husband," she said clearly. "We have recorded evidence demonstrating intent to obtain control over her finances and legal autonomy." Intent. That word again. Now in a courtroom. Now official. The judge looked down at the documents, then at the phone. "Play it," she said. My heart didn't race. It didn't panic. It steadied, because I had heard it so many times already. Richard's voice filled the courtroom. "If she's deemed incompetent, it simplifies everything." No one moved. No one spoke. The judge didn't react immediately. She just listened, carefully, completely. Then, Rebecca played the second recording. Power of attorney, temporary at first. The judge's expression shifted, subtle, but unmistakable. She oaked up. At Richard. "Is this your voice?" Rebecca played the second recording. Power of attorney, temporary at first. The judge's expression shifted, subtle, but unmistakable. She looked up. At Richard. "Is this your voice?" she asked. He hesitated. Just for a second. But that second was everything. "Yes," he said. No explanation, no denial, just admission. "And these statements," she continued, "they were taken out of context." "Answer the question," she said firmly. Silence. Then, "Yes." The room changed, not visibly, but completely, because that was it. The moment, the truth, no longer argued, no longer debated, confirmed. Rebecca stepped forward. "Your Honor, this is not a case of cognitive decline," she said. "This is a calculated attempt to establish legal control through fabricated concern." Fabricated. Calculated. Control. Every word landed, exactly where it needed to. The judge leaned back slightly, eyes still on Richard. "Mr. Harper," she said slowly, "this court takes allegations of incapacity very seriously." He said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. "Based on the evidence presented," she continued, "this petition is denied." Denied. One word. But it felt like the air came back into my lungs. And furthermore, she added, "This matter will be referred for further review regarding potential misconduct." Misconduct. Professional consequences. Legal consequences. Everything Rebecca had warned about. Everything he never thought would happen. because he never thought he would be exposed. The hearing ended shortly after, just like that. Months of manipulation, weeks of tension, all collapsing in minutes. As we stepped out of the courtroom, Richard finally looked at me. Really looked at me. Not as a case, not as a problem, but as someone he had completely underestimated. "You destroyed everything," he said quietly. I met his gaze. "No," I replied. "You did." And for the first time, he didn't argue, didn't defend, didn't correct. He just stood there, silent, because deep down, he knew it was true. I walked away, not quickly, not dramatically, just steadily, because this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about winning. It was about truth. And finally, the truth had been heard. After everything that happened, I realized something I wish I had understood sooner. Control doesn't always come in the form of anger or violence. Sometimes it comes quietly, carefully, wrapped in concern, disguised as protection. And if you're not paying attention, control doesn't always come in the form of anger or violence. Sometimes it comes quietly, carefully, wrapped in concern, disguised as protection. And if you're not paying attention, you can start to question your own reality, your own memory, your own voice. What saved me wasn't strength. It wasn't intelligence. It was awareness. The moment I stopped asking, "What's wrong with me?" and started asking, "What's happening to me?" that changed everything. If you're watching this and something feels off in your life, trust that feeling. Document what you can. Speak up when you're ready. And most importantly, don't let anyone convince you that your reality isn't real. Because once you lose that, you lose everything. But if you hold on to it even quietly, you can take your life back. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been in a situation where someone made you doubt yourself? What would you have done in my place? Leave a comment below and share your perspective. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. You never know who might need to hear something like this today.